Hello and welcome back. This is Barrett from the C4 Cyber Club here at Cypress College. And in this video today, we're going to cover the Ethical Hacking Lab series, Backdooring with Netcat. So as you can see here, this is, I suppose you can call one kind of Netcat, but what we're going to be looking at is the command line version that essentially is often referred to as a Swiss Army knife of networking. So Netcat is a tool that a lot of network and sysadmins use for various things. It could essentially read and write TCP or UDP data across a network, and it's also very useful for debugging and testing. Some additional uses: it's quick and simple data transfers. Port scanning, which is something we're going to look at in this lab. Sometimes if you're maybe doing a penetration test and you get access to a machine, you find that it doesn't have Nmap, you want to do some internal scanning, it doesn't allow you to install it. But a nice little secret trick is doing port scanning with Netcat. So this is why that's very useful information to know. We'll also look at transferring files with Netcat. It could be used for other things too, like web debugging. You could send common HTTP requests, like a GET request and a POST request to a web server. It could even be used for a simple chat or web server. And also, this is not covered in the lab, but I am going to do a little demonstration at the end of how it can be used to listen on a particular port and then run a program. And this is where we see come into play a lot with malware. So it will essentially, the attacker will be set up to listen, and then whatever when the malware is run, it might have malicious code in there to run a very simple Netcat command that tells the victim machine to connect to the listener, which is the attacker, and execute their shell. For example, /bin/bash, which would be the location of their bash shell. And this is what's called a reverse shell. So that's something that's definitely can be used or can be done using Netcat. So like I said, that'll be a little bit of a bonus after we get through the rest of the lab. So first things first, we will be working on our Kali machine, and we'll want to open up the terminal. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this first command, and we could break down each of the command options here. So the -W1, it's telling it to wait 1 second between scanning. -Z is entering into port scanning mode. So this is very important. As somebody who recently took the CISA Plus exam, this is a question that could pop up. So it's definitely useful information to know that Netcat can do port scanning, and it's used with the -Z option. The -V will enter verbose mode, which means it will print out each line as it scans. -N, it's not going to do DNS lookups. Sometimes good to be as least noisy as possible in doing active reconnaissance such as this. And then a port range to scan. So we're going to scan 1 through 100 ports. Okay, so we'll run NC for Netcat. You can also type out Netcat. So -W1 -ZVN. So you could usually combine options together like this. And then the IP address, and then 1 through 100. Okay, so as you can see, it's going a second at a time because we set that to 1 second. It's going to go through all these 100 ports. I'm going to go ahead and jump the video to when this is complete. All right, so the scan is done. If you're following along the video, feel free to pause me for a second while your scan catches up. But essentially, if we scroll up, we see, okay, port 80 a connection succeeded. So essentially what this is doing is just attempting to make a connection. And if it does, if a connection is made, then we can verify, okay, that port is indeed open. We keep scrolling up. Okay, we also see a connection to port 53, which is for DNS. And keep scrolling, everything else, there was no connections made. So once again, just as a reminder, this is a really good use case if you maybe get into a system as a penetration tester and Nmap is not installed, you're unable to install it, but you need to do a quick and dirty port scan. Netcat is an option. So this obviously doesn't give you as much information as Nmap would, but it could definitely get you going in the right direction. All right, so moving on to the second part of the lab, we're going to look at establishing connections with Netcat. So we want to come over to the OpenSUSE machine. Remember, it is this machine here, and we will launch a terminal here as well. Go ahead and increase the font size a little bit. And first thing we want to do is change to the root user. So we'll use sudo su. Enter in the password osboxes.org. All right. So we're going to set this machine to be, a listener on port 53. So when we hit enter, you see, okay, nothing's really happening here, but it's listening. It's listening and waiting. So if we go back to our Kali machine and also run Netcat, and add the IP address of the OpenSUSE machine and say we want to connect also on port 53. We hit enter and we see a blinking cursor. So what happens if we type in hello? Are you there? Now if we went back to the OpenSUSE machine, you see, and this is kind of like we were talking about in the beginning, where this could be used for a very simple like chat server, because it's just really relaying these messages back and forth on essentially any port that you designate. It didn't need to be 53; it could be any port. So yeah, actually that looks like that's about it for the part 2, just showing how these connections are established by setting the one machine up to be a listener, and then the other machine makes the active connection to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and press Control-C here. This will have closed out. Since we press Control-C over here, we closed that listening connection, and then it closed out here. All right, so now we can look at transferring files with Netcat. So on the OpenSUSE machine, I'm going to press up and bring this command, and we're just going to say, listen on port 53 for a file called test file. Okay. And this is a good example. Maybe a sysadmin or network administrator just needs to transfer a file over very quickly between machines. And this is a very easy way to do it through a command line. So on the Kali machine, we'll say nano test file. So that's the nano text editor. And we're essentially just creating a new file. We'll call it, we'll say this is my test transfer file. This is the contents of the file. Press Control X, yes to save. And now if we did a listing, we see that test file has been created. And now we could run Netcat from the Kali machine. We'll say wait 3 seconds between connection attempts. 168.0.2, so that's the IP of the OpenSUSE machine, port 53, and we want to send it this test file. And we don't get a particular response here, which means it probably sent. So we see that this is no longer listening. And if we do ls We see test file here on the OpenSUSE machine, and we can cat that out to the terminal, and we see this is my test transfer file. So these are very simple examples of Netcat use, but once again, it is often used for these very simple purposes. Very quick file transfers, establishing connections between machines. And now I'd actually like to show one more example in how reverse shells are done, because this is especially very common, like I was saying in the beginning of the video, in a lot of malware, malicious files that are run. In a lot of cases, a script is being run in the background that's setting up the victim machine to beacon back, to connect back to the attacker machine that's set up to listen on a particular port. And when they beacon back, they're also executing their shell. All right, so that's very bad, but that's essentially what a reverse shell is. So I'm actually gonna minimize these, and I'm using my own VirtualBox setup because I found that the labs in the NetLab, the Netcat was actually outdated, and it didn't allow the execute command, which is a -E option. So let's say this parrot-sec machine is going to be the victim, and the Kali machine here is the attacker. So of course, this one needs to be set up to be a listener. So we'll say, let's listen on port 1337. So you can see it's listening on any, so it's receiving any connections at all. And now over here, let's pretend that somebody on this machine just opened up a phishing email with a PDF attached to it. Well, that also had malicious code, and it created a Netcat command. First, I should probably get my IP address over here. Okay, so we're 10.0.2.12. So if we netcat 10.0.2.12, and now we need the port 1337, and now -E for execute bin bash. So this is our bash shell location. All right, so you see over here on the Kali machine, we have a connection. So connect to 10.0.2.12. This is the Kali machine from 10.0.2.5, which is the parrot-sec machine over here. Now, if I did ls to get a listing, you see this is actually the contents of this system. We are now in a reverse shell. If I echoed out, hi there, I am in your machine, and we redirect that to hello.txt, and we come back over here. Let's go ahead and close out. We'll do Control C. So you see the connection terminated. But if we do ls, we see the hello.txt. We could cat that out, and you see that was added there. So that is an example of a reverse shell, also called a backdoor. This is what attackers are looking to do. More often than not, malware is going to have this reverse shell capability, and they're able to get into your system as a backdoor, as backdoor access. So great. So that concludes this lab. That, like I said, that was a little bonus portion. Backdooring with Netcat for the Ethical Hacking Lab series. All right, thanks a lot for watching.